The child who learned to stay silent. Psychology explained there's a moment in a child's life, not always dramatic, not always visible, when silence becomes safer than expression. It doesn't happen all at once. It accumulates. A sharp tone here, a dismissive glance there. A teacher who rolls their eyes. A parent who interrupts. A sibling who laughs. A friend who turns away. Slowly, the child begins to understand a psychological law that no one taught them with words, but everyone enforced with actions. Speaking your truth invites risk. And if you want to stay safe, if you want to belong, you learn to stay silent. What's terrifying is that we reward this adaptation. We call those children well-behaved. We say they're mature, obedient, easygoing. We praise their restraint without realizing that what we're applauding is often a form of quiet survival. Because what we see as composure might actually be fear. What looks like calm might be emotional suppression. And what we interpret as maturity might be the early death of self-expression. This is the tragedy of silence. It disguises itself as discipline, but underneath it is often a muted scream for connection, for safety, for space to exist fully.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But you might ask, why does this matter? Why go so deep into the psychology of a quiet child? Because that child never really goes away. They grow up. They enter classrooms, jobs, relationships. They become adults who struggle to say what they feel, who hesitate before expressing a boundary, who smile when they want to scream. Adults who apologize before asking questions, who rehearse conversations in their heads but never speak them aloud. Adults who, even in moments of deep hurt or insight, choose silence not because they have nothing to say, but because the memory of not being heard still echoes louder than their current voice. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many times in your life have you stayed silent when something inside you begged to speak? And more importantly, why? Was it fear of judgment? Fear of conflict? Fear of being misunderstood? Or deeper still, was it fear of not mattering? Because behind every silence there's a belief. And often that belief is, my truth isn't safe here. Psychologically, this is known as learned silence. It's not innate. It's conditioned, and it operates like a reflex. It doesn't ask for your permission, it just activates. You walk into a room where people talk over each other, and your mouth closes. You prepare to share a vulnerable story, but your body freezes. You want to say no to something, but the word gets stuck in your throat. And afterward, you feel the weight of what you didn't say. The regret, the tension, the sadness of self-betrayal. This is how silence becomes a prison. Not because you can't speak, but because you don't know if it's allowed. But here's the deeper, more philosophical dilemma. What happens to a society when too many of its members learn to stay silent? What happens when entire groups, generations, or cultures internalize the belief that their voice is dangerous? We create a collective illusion of harmony while emotionally starving. We build institutions where conformity is rewarded and authenticity is suspicious. We produce systems that value obedience over insight, repetition over originality. And in the process, we lose something vital, not just the sound of individual voices, but the evolution of shared consciousness itself. Think about it. Every great breakthrough, scientific, artistic, philosophical, began with someone refusing to stay silent. Someone who said the thing no one wanted to hear. Someone who shattered the illusion of agreement to introduce a deeper truth. But how many voices never reached us? How many truths died in the throats of those who had no safe place to speak? This is not just a psychological issue, it's existential. Because to speak is not merely to make sound. It is to declare, I exist. And when a child learns to stay silent, what they're really learning is to make themselves smaller in order to survive. They're editing themselves out of their own life. And unless they unlearn that silence, they will keep shrinking long after the danger has passed. So how do we unlearn it? That's the real question. Because telling someone to just speak up is like telling someone with a broken leg to just run. You have to understand the injury before you can heal it. You have to trace the silence back to its source. Who taught you that your voice wasn't safe? What moment taught you that your truth was too heavy, too much, too inconvenient? And more importantly, what would it look like to reclaim it? This journey isn't about volume, it's about alignment. It's not about talking more, it's about speaking from a place of truth. And sometimes the first step isn't speaking to others. It's speaking to yourself. Saying the things you were never allowed to say. Hearing your own voice without judgment. Because the most dangerous silence isn't external, it's internal. It's when you stop listening to yourself. And that's where healing begins, by turning inward and saying, I hear you, I believe you, you matter. In the next part, we'll explore how silence becomes identity and why breaking it can feel like breaking yourself. We'll go deeper into the psychology of self-censorship, the fear of disrupting relationships, and the philosophical question, who am I without my silence? The mask of quiet. When silence becomes identity, there comes a point when silence stops being a temporary strategy and starts becoming who you are. It's no longer just a choice made in certain moments, it becomes your default posture toward the world. You enter rooms quietly, you measure your words carefully, and you feel the weight of your thoughts before they ever reach your lips. People describe you as chill, easygoing, deep, or even mysterious. And maybe part of you likes that. Maybe part of you has come to rely on that image. But deep down, there's a quieter truth still buried beneath the performance. You're not just quiet, you've become your own silence. This is when silence shifts from a coping mechanism to a mask. And what's terrifying is how well it works. The world often prefers the silent ones. Not because it loves them, but because they are easier to manage. They don't confront, they don't disrupt, they don't challenge the comfort of the status quo. They adapt, they internalize, they nod even when they disagree. And over time, they forget what it felt like to speak without fear. Worse, they begin to mistake the absence of conflict for the presence of peace. But silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's just a well-decorated prison. When you wear the mask of quiet long enough, you start forgetting who you were before it. You begin to wonder, was I ever loud? Did I ever speak freely? Was I ever unapologetically myself? And the longer you live behind that mask, the more your identity fuses with your avoidance. You no longer say, I'm afraid to speak. You say, I'm just not the kind of person who speaks up. It becomes a personality trait, a label, a story you tell yourself to justify the protection. But what if it's not who you are? What if it's who you became to survive? This is where the psychological merges with the philosophical. Because identity is not fixed, it's fluid. And yet we treat it like stone. We say things like, I've always been like this, or this is just who I am, as if we were carved that way by fate. But what if those statements are just echoes of childhood defenses? What if they're not truths, but scars? Every silence you kept as a child became a brick in the wall of your adult identity. And now you live inside that wall, calling it home. But here's the deeper question. Who would you be without your silence? Not in some loud, extroverted sense, but in the sense of being fully alive, fully present, fully expressed. What would it feel like to say what you actually think, in real time, without rehearsing or apologizing or shrinking? What would it mean to disappoint someone rather than betray yourself? That's the risk of removing the mask and the freedom. Of course, there's a reason we wear it so tightly. Because removing the mask invites exposure. It invites questions. It disrupts the stories people have about us. And if we've built entire relationships, careers, even identities around being the quiet one, then what happens when we stop performing that role? Who are we to the people who've only known the edited version of us? Will they accept the full version? Will we? This is why unmasking is so hard. It's not just about speaking, it's about grieving the version of you that stayed silent. It's about mourning the years you spent muting yourself to be accepted. And it's about forgiving yourself for thinking that was the only way to survive. Because maybe it was then, but it doesn't have to be now. Let me ask you something that may pierce you. How much of your identity is actually just your defense mechanisms? And if you took those away, if you laid down the silence, the people-pleasing, the self-editing, what would remain? That's the real you. Not the version who plays it safe, but the one who dares to be seen. And yes, it's scary, but it's also sacred. Because that's where your power lies, not in hiding, but in honesty. In the next part, we'll dive into why breaking the silence can feel so dangerous, even when the threat is no longer real. We'll examine the body's role in memory, the nervous system's resistance to vulnerability, and the philosophical challenge of trusting yourself again after years of self-abandonment. The body remembers why speaking feels like a threat. There's a strange phenomenon that happens when you finally try to speak after a lifetime of silence. Your mouth opens, but your chest tightens. Your throat constricts. Your stomach flips. Your heart races not from excitement but from what feels like danger. You might be in a safe room with loving people or writing a harmless message to someone you trust, and still, your body reacts like you're about to walk into fire. That's because for many of us, speaking our truth doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels threatening. Not metaphorically, literally, as if our survival depends on our silence. And in a way, it once did. The body is not logical. It doesn't care about philosophy or context or rational arguments. It cares about patterns. It remembers, not in words, but in sensations. When you were young and vulnerable, your nervous system was shaped by what it had to do to keep you safe. If staying quiet protected you from emotional harm, embarrassment, punishment, or abandonment, then your body learned a lesson. Silence equals safety. And now, even when the danger is gone, the body still responds to perceived risk the same way. It floods you with adrenaline. It tightens your muscles. It whispers through sensation. Don't do this. It's not safe to be seen. This is why personal growth can feel like self-betrayal. Your mind might be ready. Your values might be aligned. You know you should say something, but your body is screaming no, and it often wins. Because the mind can think, but the body believes, and its beliefs are not based on logic, they're built from experience. This is why people freeze in moments that seem trivial to others. Why someone can't say no to a simple request or "I need help" to a close friend. The words are small, but the body reacts as if a lion is in the room. It's not weakness. It's memory. So how do we overcome this? Not by forcing ourselves to be louder or stronger, but by learning to retrain the body's sense of safety. You don't fight fear by yelling over it. You soothe it by proving over and over again that the present is not the past, that this moment is not that moment, that you are no longer the child who had to stay silent to avoid being hurt. You're the adult now. You have power. You have choice. You can walk away. You can speak and survive. But this is not just a psychological process, it's a philosophical one. Because it demands a new relationship with fear. Most of us wait until fear is gone before we act. But what if fear isn't the enemy? What if fear is the signal that you're stepping into truth? Think about it. Why would your body resist something unless it held power? Why would your silence be so heavily guarded unless your voice could change something? What if the fear of speaking isn't a sign that something's wrong, but a sign that something real is about to happen? This invites us to ask a deeper question. What if the most important things we have to say are the ones that scare us the most to say out loud? Not because they're dangerous, but because they're sacred, because they reveal us, because they expose what we've hidden, even from ourselves. And in doing so, they hold the power to liberate not just us, but everyone who's waiting to hear someone else say it first. This is why healing is not just about therapy or journaling or self-awareness. It's about rehearsing safety, practicing expression in low-stakes environments, speaking your truth in small doses, building trust with your own voice one word at a time. Because the first time you speak, you may tremble, you may cry, you may feel like you're breaking. But you're not breaking, you're opening. And every time you do, your body learns. We spoke, and we didn't die. We said the thing, and we were still loved. We revealed ourselves, and the world didn't end. Let me ask you, what truth lives inside you that your body still believes is dangerous? And what would happen not if you shouted it from the rooftops, but if you whispered it into a safe space, just once, to someone who could hold it with care? In the next part, we'll explore how to move beyond survival into expression as liberation. We'll explore how finding your voice isn't just about healing your past, but about shaping your future, influencing your world, and becoming the kind of person who speaks not from fear, but from freedom. The voice that shaped the future. From silence to sovereignty, there's a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when the act of speaking is no longer about release, but about creation. You're no longer just trying to heal the past or prove that you matter. You're not trying to be heard for the sake of validation. You speak because you've remembered that your voice is a tool of power. It shapes your reality, not just in emotional terms, but in existential ones. You realize that every time you name a truth, you carve a path forward not just for yourself, but for others who are still trapped in silence. You become more than a survivor. You become a sovereign. Sovereignty isn't about dominance or control. It's not about being the loudest person in the room. It's about speaking from a place that is deeply rooted, unshakable, not because you've invulnerable, but because you've made peace with vulnerability. You know the cost of silence. You've lived it. And now you choose expression because it's how you stay alive, how you stay real. You no longer perform safety, you embody it. And in doing so, you stop asking the world for permission to be yourself. This is where the deepest shift happens. You realize that your voice is not just something you use, it's something you are. Every word you speak from integrity realigns you with your essence. Every time you say no when you mean no, or yes when you mean yes, you reclaim a piece of your soul. You stop outsourcing your worth to the reactions of others. You stop shaping your truth to fit into someone else's comfort zone. And you begin to live in alignment with your values, your vision, your inner compass. But here's the part most people miss. Your voice doesn't just liberate you, it leads. Whether you mean it to or not, the moment you speak your truth, you become a mirror. Others see themselves in your courage. They feel less alone in their struggle. You model authenticity. You grant invisible permission. And suddenly, your voice is no longer just yours, it's a ripple that moves through the collective. That's how change begins. Not with mass movements, but with individual awakenings that refuse to stay silent. Let me ask you something final, and maybe life-changing. If you knew your voice could transform someone else's life, would you still hold it back out of fear? And if not, what are you waiting for? The truth is, the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more truth. It needs more people who speak not to impress, but to connect, who don't talk to fill space, but to open it, who don't argue to be right, but express to be real. And that begins with you, not some future, more confident version of you. This you, the one reading these words, the one who still trembles, the one who still doubts, the one who still carries the child who learned to stay silent. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all, realizing that the voice you were taught to suppress is the exact voice the world needs most. The child who learned to stay silent is not broken. That child was wise. That child survived. But now, you are the adult. You are the protector, the guide. And it's your sacred task to liberate that child's truth, to offer it space, to let it be spoken, to let it live. So here's the invitation. Speak. Even if your voice shakes. Speak. Even if you're not sure how it will be received. Speak. Not because you owe the world your story, but because you owe yourself the experience of living fully, without hiding, without shrinking, without shame. And when you do, you'll discover something profound. Your voice was never lost, it was simply waiting. Waiting for you to remember that silence was never your identity. It was just a chapter. And now, you're ready to write the next one. Out loud. The child who learned to stay silent has grown into the person who knows when to speak and how to shape the future with every word.